Catastrophic failure occurred when I was 19 years old. I received a letter from the Office of Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs at Indiana University Northwest inviting me to stop attending classes. That's my nice way of saying that I had been kicked out. Bad grades, not going to class. They said, you're not coming to class anyway, so you're not going to miss it. Goodbye. 19 years old. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at that time. I had a girlfriend, and I wanted to be able to take her out occasionally and things like that, so I got a job delivering pizzas. And when I wasn't delivering pizzas or taking my girlfriend's places, I was usually at Stardust Bowling Alley playing video games. That was before we didn't have to feed quarters into them. Well, this went on for about 12 months or so, and my girlfriend said to me, she said, you know, I do love you, but I don't want to marry a bum. She called me a bum. She said, I don't care what you do with your life, but you better do something. That was a very sobering reality. It's really hard when the person that you love tells you that you're a bum. It worked out okay. 30 years later and 8 kids later, we're still together. But in that moment, I was mad. Who does she think she is telling me that I'm a bum? Well, the reality is that she was right. I was a bum. I wasn't doing anything with my life. I didn't have a vision for where I was going because I'd been kicked out of college. I was a failure. But when the person you care about offers you an ultimatum, you have 3 choices. You can get angry, which I did. You can blow it off, or you can look in the mirror and recognize that she's right. That's what I did. That is the first step that I realized in my 6 steps to turn your big failure into a bigger success. The first thing that you have to do is you have to face your circumstances. I had no future. I had no idea what I was going to do. The person that I loved was telling me that I better figure it out or she was not going to wait around. I had to face my circumstances. I had to look myself in the mirror and say, this is where you are. What are you going to do about it? Now, the second step that I discovered is similar to the first step. In fact, some people don't see the difference until I explain it to them. The second step is that you have to take responsibility for where you are. Now, how is that different from facing your circumstances? Well, it's all about where you place the blame. When you face your circumstances, you can place the blame elsewhere. I was really good at that. The reason I was getting bad grades was because the professor was putting things on the test that I didn't hear in the lecture, probably because I wasn't at the lecture. Or I couldn't find a parking spot, so I couldn't get to class on time. Or. I was always blaming other people. And I think we've all been there. But there comes a point where you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, no, this is your fault. It's not someone else's. And that's the second step that you have to take. You have to take responsibility for your actions. That's hard to do. As adults, we talk about taking responsibility. Any other parents here besides myself? You're probably always telling your kids that, no, you're responsible. You need to take responsibility for this. But even as adults, it can be hard. Remember when you were 19, how hard that was. You have to take responsibility. So I did. I said, okay, this is my mess. I've got to clean it up. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my wife, Kate. By the way, parenthetically, my name is John. My wife's name is Kate, and we do have 8 kids. We are the original John and Kate plus 8. I want you all to know that. And still happily married, unlike the Goslings. But anyway, I digress a little bit. So, once I took responsibility, I had to think, well, what do you really want to do with yourself? What do you want to do with your life? When I had first gone to college, I was majoring in pre-med. Now, anybody who knows me will tell you that's laughable. I have no business being in pre-med or medicine or anything like that. I didn't even like science, but doctors make good money. And so that's why at the age of 18, when I first went to college, I declared a major in pre-med because the doctors make good money. The reality is I could never see myself wearing a lab coat. I could never see myself prescribing medication to people. I could never see myself even talking to patients about their illnesses. But I started to think about what I wanted to do. That third step is to cast a vision. I started thinking about what kind of vision I could have for my future. And I remember the wise words of my dear Crown Point High School guidance counselor. I'm a Crown Point graduate, so I'm really glad to be here tonight. And Russ Keller told me, he said, John, when you go to college, you should major in math or science teaching. You should be an education major. You should teach students. And I laughed at it. But I started thinking about it after my being kicked out of college, and I thought, you know, I can see myself working with students. I can see myself sponsoring a club, or being a mentor to students who are struggling, or taking students on field trips. I could see myself doing those things. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to major in education. Now, the problem was that I had to get back into college first. My GPA was a 1.4. That's really low, in case you didn't know. And I had to get myself back into college, and I needed to get into the education program. But my GPA had to be at least a 2.5 in order to get into the education program. I went back to college. I retook 2 courses that I had failed. I got an A and a B plus in those 2 courses. And in 1 semester, my GPA went from a 1.4 to a 2.3. Almost a full letter grade jump, which is really hard to do. And because of that effort, the director of student education at IU Northwest said, you know what? I'm going to let you in. I'm going to waive the 2.5 GPA requirement and let you in. That 4th step that I had to take was actually what I call taking the first step. Now some of you might say, wait a minute, you're calling it step 4, but you're saying it's take the first step. Let me explain. The first 3 steps, facing your circumstances, taking responsibility, and casting a vision, they're important steps, but they're largely mental or spiritual or emotional steps. You have to kind of get your mind in the right place to do that. There comes a point where you have to take a tangible action step. And that's what step 4 is, to take that tangible step. For me, it was getting back into college and cleaning up some of my mess. I didn't have any idea that this wonderful professor, Dr. Boland, was going to waive my requirement. And if he hadn't waived that requirement, I would have had to wait an entire calendar year to get into the education program. My professional career would be vastly different than it is today. So I'm very grateful for the fact that he saw something in me, saw some determination, and was willing to waive the minimum requirement, take a little bit of a risk, and let me in. I'm very grateful for him, and I always will be. We all have people in our lives who have done something small that has had a big impact on us. And we should think about those people, and we should be grateful to them, and maybe give them a call and thank them. I would encourage you to do that. Once I was in the program, I had a goal. I had a vision. I'm going to become a teacher. And I was headed toward that goal. I took that step. I was headed toward that goal of becoming a teacher. But, like so many of us in this room, when you start heading toward a goal and you keep your eyes focused on that goal, if you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, you start to drift a little bit. You start to find yourself falling off track. You start to find yourself, even though you've got your eyes on the prize, you might be moving this way instead of that way. How many of you are familiar with the movie Apollo 13? Many of you. For those of you who aren't, Apollo 13 is a true story. It's a movie about 3 astronauts who had an explosion on their spaceship on the way to the moon. And they weren't able to make it to the moon, they had to get back home. And their entire vision went from getting to the moon and landing safely to getting home safely. There's a scene in the movie that is so exciting because they couldn't use their onboard computers. They were conserving all of their energy. And so they had to make this controlled burn of the engines. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. They had to fire their engines for 30 seconds so that they would enter the atmosphere of Earth correctly. If they came in too steep, they would burn up in the atmosphere. And if they came in too shallow, they would skip off the atmosphere, much like a stone skips across a pond. So they had to burn that engine for 30 seconds, and during that 30 seconds, they had to keep the Earth in the middle of the window. Very exciting scene. What they were doing was they were making a course correction. And that's something that we all need to do when we're on our way to our goal. We've got our eyes fixed on the goal. We need to be looking around where we are right now and making sure that we're still on the right path, right on the right target. And we might have to make some course corrections. For me, a course correction that I could have made very naturally in the first semester of college was to drop out of my biology class that I was in as a freshman, and I was failing after 2 weeks. I could have dropped that class right away and taken another course. Or I could have used the extra time for not taking that course to focus on my other studies. That would have been a very easy course correction for me to make. Instead, I pulled my grade all the way up to a D, and then doubled down by enrolling in another biology class the very next semester. Not very good idea. I was not making the right course correction there. If we keep our eyes so focused on things, we don't see what's happening around us. We need to keep ourselves on the path by making those minute course corrections. And step 6. Step 6 is to celebrate milestones along the way. Sometimes we get so focused on where we're going that we bypass little things that are victories and we don't even pay attention to them because they're not the big victory that we're headed for. They're smaller victories. We need to celebrate those along the way. For me, I celebrated when I got back into college. First of all, it showed my girlfriend that I was serious, okay? And second of all, I wasn't sure they were going to accept me. I celebrated when I retook those 2 courses. By the way, I have to tell you this, one of those courses, talk about a full circle experience, one of those courses was a math course that I now teach, that I failed. And the reason I failed it is because I just didn't go to the final exam. That's a bad idea, by the way. I'm an academic advisor. I'd like to tell all of you that if you know someone who's thinking about blowing off your final exam, tell them not to. Because I was getting an A in that class, and I just didn't go to the final, and I failed it. I got an F because I didn't go to the final exam. I now teach that same class. Something ironic about that. I celebrated when I got those good grades. I celebrated when I graduated from college. I celebrated when my girlfriend said she wasn't going to break up with me because I was finally doing something with my life. I celebrated when I became a high school teacher in Gary. I celebrated when I got hired at IU Northwest. And I celebrated in 2014 when I was recognized by Indiana University by receiving their President's Award for Distinguished Teaching for the entire IU system. This guy who had gone from a college flunk out won the highest teaching honor you can win at Indiana University at the same college that kicked him out. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not defined by our failures. We are all failures. Every one of us has experienced failures. That doesn't define us. It's what we do after the failure. Your life is not a snapshot. It's not a picture. Sometimes we get so focused on what's going wrong that we look at that moment and we say, this defines my life. Your life is not a snapshot. It's a movie. It's a film. It's going to have highs and lows. But if you can remember, every time you experience a failure, take a step back and walk yourself through these 6 steps. Face your circumstances. Once you've done that, recognize that you're responsible. Take responsibility for where you've ended up. Once you've done that, step back and say, okay, what can I do better? I'm going to cast a vision for my future. And once you've got that vision in front of you, take a tangible step in that direction. But don't forget, forces are going to pull you off that path, so you need to make course corrections along the way so that you stay on target. And every time you take a step and you celebrate or you hit a milestone, you need to celebrate it. Don't ignore it. Completing this book was a huge victory for me because I got sick last year in the middle of writing it. I got Lyme disease. I didn't know if I was going to be able to finish the book. I was really, really ill. By the way, Lyme disease is not my recommended choice for a diet plan. I lost 40 pounds and I was miserable. And I put the book away, but I eventually used the 6 steps to walk my way through and force my way through to finally get that book published. And when I got a case of books in the mail and I opened it up and I saw my completed book, don't you think I celebrated that milestone? Oh, you bet I did. And now, I've gotten to speak at several different functions, done some different signings. Being here tonight with some new friends and a few older friends, I'm celebrating this. Last week, I had a university ask me to come and do a keynote on my book, and I'm celebrating that as well. None of it would have happened. None of it would have happened if I hadn't been kicked out of college at the age of 19. In conclusion, I wouldn't ordinarily end a Toastmaster speech like this, but I'd be remiss if I didn't thank, good timing. If I didn't thank Carol, Charles, Mike, 3 friends that I knew when I was in this Toastmasters Club a few years ago, for being here, and thank all of you for giving me just a few minutes to share my story.